We'll go ahead and get started here. I hope you picked up one of these over on the table. If you didn't, go get one.
Is your mic on?
I take it my mic is working, right? All right. What we're going to do today is start off looking at a hymn that we can think of as a prayer, and then we'll do some looking at a book proposal that I wrote back in 2014, and that begins on page 3 and carries over into page 4. We'll look at that just because I want you to get a broader perspective of things I thought about in relationship to these books. And then we'll come back and look at the overarching theme on page 2, which is Wellesianity or evolutionism. And so we want to become familiar with that. And then you see there in the first column of page 2 are the 3 books, and we'll just use that as a springboard for talking about each of the books. So that'll be what we do after. So we're going backwards. I thought we'd go the other way, but it seems to me we'll go backwards instead. Now, what I would like you to do is on the first page, first column, page 1, there is a hymn by Kate Barclay Wilkinson, which I suppose many of you know. But what I would like you to do is to read down through those verses and indicate one, you can mark it or just hold it down, that seems to be a prayer that you would be praying today. So take a little bit of time to read. Well, I'll read them out loud since we have a mic going, but I want you to pay attention and figure out which one of these seems to resonate with you today. So we should read this prayerfully. In fact, why don't we all read it together out loud, and you try to pay attention to which one you would like to focus on, and then I want you to share that with someone. May the mind of Christ my Savior live in me from day to day, by His love and power controlling all I do and say. May the Word of God dwell richly in my heart from hour to hour, so that I triumph only through His power. May the peace of God my Father rule my life in everything, that I may be calm to comfort sick and sorrowing. May the love of Jesus fill me as the waters fill the sea, Him exalting, self-abasing. This is victory. May I run the race before me, strong and brave to face the foe, looking only unto Jesus as I onward go. May His beauty rest upon me as I seek the lost to win, and may they forget the channel, seeing only Him. So share with somebody around you, a group of 3, a group of 2, or something like that. Which one of these verses strikes you as the prayer you would be praying today?
I have 1 and 5. 1 and 5. Yeah.
I think when I first looked at it, 3 kind of did, but then I looked down and sour and 4. I don't think
1 and 4, the mind of Christ and the love of Jesus. Yeah.
that are going on in the world.
I've always liked verse 2. May the Word of God dwell richly in my heart
I know, as you say, they all
from hour to hour. And I like verse 6. May His beauty rest upon me as I seek the lost to win, and may they forget the channel, seeing only Him.
Yeah, that kind of goes with the same stuff too, Yeah, kind of, this too will pass, or I don't know, and I guess, and that kind of goes with number 2, may the Word of God dwell.
So what I'd like you to do after you've shared that, if any of you would like to speak up to the whole group, or all of you if you wish. But if any of you would like to speak up and say, this is the one that struck me today, and maybe explain why.
For me, the first, what am I calling this? First verse and the fifth verse, both of them speak to me.
So may the mind of Christ my Savior, and may I run the race before me. Mm-hmm. And why is it that they speak to you today, you think?
Because my focus needs and is on God. And instead of reacting or being shocked, I think it's just best that I focus on the good things. What I can do in my territory, in my space, and as far as running the race, that's a part of it. Running the race, knowing that he's controlling everything, and that I should be less concerned with earthly things,
Okay.
more concerned about.
So also, I should say this, if you speak up, you have to say your name.
Oh.
What is your name?
My name is Mary Jane Betcher.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Jane. Someone else. Yes. What's your name?
Judy Abraham.
Judy Abraham.
Number 3, they all speak to me, but this one, I like that, may the peace of God my Father rule my life and everything, because I tend to be a worrier and also trying to control things, and when that happens to me, I get all stressed out, and then nothing works, and so I have to step back and say, okay, I know I gave control up to you, Lord, but get it away, because I'm trying to take it. I'm trying to get it back.
Yeah. Yeah, and it reminds me of the verse, where Jesus says, my peace I give unto you, not as the world gives,
Right.
give I unto you, but let not your heart be troubled. It's, the things that Jesus said about peace that he gives us. Yes. Someone else. Well, Lynn first.
Yeah, I'm Lynn. At first I was looking at number 3, the peace, but then as we were talking, I was thinking maybe the one that really kind of hits me, what I feel more like today is number 5. And I think it's similar because it's looking to surpassing or overcoming what is happening in my life, that this too will pass and God is there, with everything, so.
Okay, good. So, verse 5, may I run the race before me, because you're moving on.
Yeah. There are things that are ahead that, let me face this thing and not worry about things too much.
Well, and both what you said and what Mary Jane said about that is, what is it in Hebrews chapter 12, I think, to fix your eyes on Jesus as you run the race, because he set the pattern before us, and there's like a cloud of witnesses that has gone before us.
The great cloud of witnesses, yeah.
Yes, the great cloud. Hal? What's your name, Hal?
Hal, yeah. How the hell are you? I selected number 1 because for me there are just so many, I have a low threshold of curiosity, and there are so many distractions in life that I want him to be with me in all that I say and do. And I'll get to the end of a day and I look back and I thought, where was Jesus in that? And it's humbling and frustrating, and I wind up disappointing myself from time to time. knowing full well what I ought to do, and then wandering off into the weeds.
So you're really focusing in on that last two lines, his love and power controlling all I do and say. But it occurs to me as you said that we can't, I don't think, put our full concentration on everything that we do day to day and say, all right, now what would Jesus do? It's more like I turn my life over to you, Jesus, early on, and trusting that you'll forgive me if I mess up, but that you'll be there working in and through me. I think otherwise we just get overburdened with trying to decipher every little thing,
Yeah, and one line in the Bible that comes to mind is, pray unceasingly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who does that?
Brother Lawrence.
Say what?
Lawrence.
Yeah. And I thought, there are other things to be done during the day. How do we get all of it done? And so I kind of put aside the exact interpretation of those words and said to myself, just keep in mind what the Lord has for me to do.
And that he's right here, right now. I may be doing something else, say, oh yeah, thanks Lord for being here, something like that. Anybody else have one that you want to share that spoke to you? Yes.
I can be old-fashionedly late, but
You got to tell us your name.
my name is Holly. And I was just looking at this poem, and the first stanza, I liked that one, and it reminded me of one of the associate pastors that was at our church. He passed away. And he had commented, what he had done too, that reminded him, this stanza reminded me of that, is he always meant like how having Jesus' hand on your shoulder, stand beside you, have that hand that, so when you have those moments where, whether it's anger or despair or sadness or anxiety things, just remember he's got his hand on your shoulder, he's got you to help carry you through that, and getting more and more into his word. The more that you read his word, the more closer that you get.
Thank you, Holly. Did you want to respond to that?
No, I must say that between Lynn and Holly commenting, a couple of words came to mind, and always I'm thinking of anthems that we sing in the choir, and one of them is Christ before me, Christ above me, Christ beside me. There's more to it than just that, but
That's a clip out of St. Patrick's Shield, right? Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
because we aren't all just one particular church. We're all going to be up there together.
Yes. Anyone else? Someone else? Yes. What's your name?
Mine's Suzanne.
Hi, Suzanne.
First, I went with 2 and 3 and 4. But now, I really think I need number 5. That one speaks to me because I just think challenges are coming along, and, I need the strength of someone beside me as I go.
Okay, so really the word strong is kind of standing out to you, it sounds like.
Speak out and to, stand up for what I believe a little more blatantly, I guess.
Yeah. Well, running the race before me, to be strong to do that. I find that the older I get, the harder it is to run. And so there's a different kind of strength involved when you're over 70, right? And I don't know what it's like for those of you over 80, so.
Same thing. How does it? All 4.
Someone else? Yeah, Randy.
I really like the imagery in number 4. As the waters fill the sea, they Jesus film. But when you picture the sea, then all I have to do is just be there and let the waters come. So really, I don't have to do anything. Just be.
I don't know why what you said reminded me of this, but one of my favorite Eric Clapton songs is, I have finally found the way to live in the presence of the Lord. And so may his presence be among us. Shall we go on then? Or does somebody else want to weigh in? Let's go back to page 3. You see there, that's a book proposal that I wrote back in 2014, 11 years ago. I never did submit it, although I thought I was going to submit it to the University of Missouri Press because they publish a lot of C.S. Lewis stuff, or at least they publish some of it. But I just wanted to go through the table of contents here so that you can see kind of the thoughts that I had about these books as I was trying to develop a book about it. Chapter 1, Lewis responds to H.G. Wells' maligning of the Martians in Out of the Silent Planet. So Out of the Silent Planet, that's book 1. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and hand this book around, which has all 3 of the books in one. All right? So H.G. Wells H.G. Wells' maligning of the Martians. Now, he maligned the Martians. The Silent Planet is by C.S. Lewis, but H.G. Wells maligns the Martians, well, you know, in the War of the Worlds, you remember that one, but also they end up not coming off very well in The First Man in the Moon. I'll let this one go this way. So this is going to be confusing, but that's all right. But Lewis actually refers to this book in Out of the Silent Planet.
Were movies made out of both of these? I know War of the Worlds.
Yeah, War of the Worlds. First Man in the Moon. It seems like there was.
I'm thinking of other Man on Moon or Man on Other Planets or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Chapter 2, I was going to say, Lewis rebuts J.B.S. Haldane and Olaf Stapleton's claim that the Venusians, that is, people living in Venus, must be exterminated. Now,
I think that's already happened, hasn't it?
well, we're not sure. Not in the 1930s. Who knows who's up there? Now here is J.B.S. Haldane's book, and I have a couple of, the second mark here at the end. You might want to glance at that. There's where he's talking about when we go to Venus, when we all get to Venus, we're going to wipe out the Venusians first because, you know, can't cohabit with them.
Anyways, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Carry on the extermination campaign.
What about the men are from Mars and women are from Venus?
Yeah, well, actually, that comes out very clearly. In Paralandra. Yes.
I'm just curious. I'm only halfway through Out of Silent Planet. And what did happen to H.G. Wells' character, the Man in the Moon? Because he refers to, I'm not going to make the same mistake.
Yeah, well, the first Man in the Moon, there are a couple of, again, it's a spaceship that takes off and one guy is kind of caught up in the same way that Ransom is here and doesn't really want to go along. And then they get to the moon, they find out they have to go inside the moon. Now I'm trying to, I think what Lewis is talking about there isn't a particular thing that, I forget what the name of the character is in First Man in the Moon, but rather this notion of being suspicious, that of course the Martians must be terrible. Of course we have to be afraid of them. And so I think that's what he's referring to when he says, I don't want to make the same mistake. But I'd have to go back and think about that a little more deeply to be sure. And please do jump in like that if you'd like to.
Well, it makes me think of the movie,
War of the Worlds.
No, not War of the Worlds, the Martians Invade.
Oh.
See that one?
I don't know.
The Martians were pretty bad.
Well, we're scared to death of aliens, you know.
Was it that one that was so crazy was Camp?
We're scared to death of aliens now.
Yeah.
They don't have to be from space.
No.
We need an other that we can dislike, and the sense is that without even knowing anything about the Martians, because we don't know anything and based on nothing, we are not going to like them and they must be bad.
Well, it's because they're green.
Well, it turns out that the green woman is not on Mars, but on Venus in Paralandra, right? Anyway, let's see. I also wanted to hand around, I mentioned there rebutting JBS Haldane in that book that's going around, but also there is a guy named J.D. Bernal. And J.B. Bernal wrote a book called The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, which sounds theological, but it isn't. Well, it is if you think of scientism as a religion. Scientism, not science, scientism. And in that book, JBS Haldane says, the world, we need to conquer the world first, that is, make do chemical farming and all that stuff, conquer the world, bring it into our control. The flesh, we're going to have to grow out of these bodies. These bodies are so limiting, and eventually we need to create some kind of a telepathic existence outside of our bodies. But one stage before we get there is that we'll probably have to manipulate these bodies in surgery. So he suggests cut off the head, because that's the important part, and immediately cook it up to some sort of life support. But that's all we need is the head. Well, that comes out in that hideous strength here. And the world, the flesh, and the devil, he's talking about we're going to have to change our psychology. And he uses sort of Freudian notions of what's wrong with us and how we have to overcome our Freudian our parents, our child, whatever those things are. Okay, and then...
Can you explain how to make baby heads?
No, you don't need to reproduce once you get to the place where you exist forever. There may only be 4 or 5 of us, but who cares? As long as we get to exist.
As long as we do.
Yeah. Let's see. The social function of science. This is chapter 4 I'm mentioning there. So JBS Haldane going around there with cutting off the head, that's the main thing. This book I wasn't aware of, but I spent a semester in Denmark, Cheryl and I did, and it was basically a sabbatical. I got to do research, and this book came to my attention. I was able to order it from England and got it, and I have never seen anybody refer to it in the C.S. Lewis criticism. And I think it's very clear. I'm going to show you this, and you may look at it, but be very careful. There is a graph here of what the social function of science. We need a committee or some sort of structure that controls everything, and this is our scientific research pattern, the organization that should control science. And I make an argument in one of my papers that this is a pattern for the NICE in that hideous strength. So which way? Is it this way next?
I think so.
Okay, so you can fold that out, but be careful with it because that's a pretty rare book, actually, and it's also a little touchy.
I don't think I can.
But anyway, J.D. Bernal was influenced by the Soviets coming. The Soviets came over to England and talked about how science was working. This is in the 1930s. And J.D. Bernal, who was a scientist in England, said, wow, they got their act together. We ought to get our act together. And so he writes this book about the social function of science and how science should be providing for all the things that humans need. Science should be in the service of humans, the way the Soviets do it. Not just research for the sake of research, but for the sake of humans, which doesn't sound too bad, really. But he got all excited about that and then figured out, well, if we're going to do that, these are the various divisions that we need.
What does NICE stand for?
The National Institute of Coordinated Experiments.
Doesn't mean nice.
In chapter 6, I was going to argue that the hideous strength, and notice this is another take on that hideous strength, which is the third book, is that I'm claiming that Lewis, having been influenced by Charles Williams became a very close friend, but also died young, and Lewis was influenced by him. You see a tremendous difference in the interplanetary travel books, the first two, Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra, and the third book, That Hideous Strength, which is situated here on Earth. And there's so much difference in style and focus, although some themes carry through, some characters carry through. But I argue that Lewis was influenced by Williams, but that Williams's The Place of the Lion, which is an interesting book to read, but that Williams's The Place of the Lion is really a Gnostic book and not a Christian book. And C.S. Lewis picks up some of the same themes as The Place of the Lion, but he manages to avoid the Gnosticism. So that was an argument that I was going to make. And then, well, the conclusion. Conclusions are as conclusions are. And if you want to see more about what I was going to tell the publisher I promised to do, you can read the rest of that. But do let me draw your attention to the back of page 4, the last column. You can read a couple of these proposed chapters, like the first one there, Dale Sullivan, 2014, C.S. Lewis's Taming of Charles Williams' Lion. That is a book, or that is a paper that I gave at a conference, and there is the long URL. If you want to look it up, you may read it. It's free. And then C.S. Lewis's satirical depiction of J.D. Bernal's The Social Function is the second one that I've listed for you there. So a couple of those are available online under academia.edu. Okay, I don't know if that spurs any questions beyond what you've already asked. If not, let's go to, okay, now what am I forgetting? Oh, there was a book. I'll pass these around. One goes each way. Notice that I mentioned Olaf Stapleton earlier. Olaf Stapleton is a science fiction writer in the mid to late 30s. And one of his books is Star Makers, the second one, Last and First Men, I think is the first of those two. But Olaf Stapleton and H.G. Wells, here's another book by H.G. Wells. This one's called The Shape of Things to Come, and it's written as though it's a history. Somebody in the future writing a history of how we came to be so advanced. So it's a science fiction history book written far in the future, looking back on us, okay? And this book kind of depicts the progress of humanity. So this book we can send this way. You'll see that I've put little marks in some of these books that you might want to turn to the page and look at. I don't think Stapleton I've marked in any of them. Anyway, what I want to turn our attention to then is on the back of page 2, the overarching theme of these 3 books by C.S. Lewis. And this is my theory that this is what holds all 3 books together. And a lot of people agree with this. So this is not original with me, and it's not very revolutionary at all. But I think we're going to have to read through this because I can't remember it without reading it. So the overarching theme of Wellesianity and evolutionism. Lewis believed that a particular world picture, we might call it an ideology, we might call it a worldview. I like to call it a mythology, but then I like to call Christianity a mythology too. Now don't be shocked by that because I'm using C.S. Lewis's definition of mythology, which is an overarching story that we find ourselves living in. It's the story that gives us some kind of notion of who we are in the cosmos. And so if you think of myth that way, Christianity is a myth because it gives us the big story that we live within. It has nothing to do with whether or not it's true or not. It's the story aspect of it.
Sounds like Campbell.
Campbell?
Yeah.
Say more about that.
There's a whole series on PBS with Bill Moyers, and I forget his first name. He was, I don't call him a philosopher, but he had all these thoughts about early people, civilizations, and how things worked. He says you have to live your mythology.
Yeah.
Hero studies and stuff like that.
Well, we have to live inside narratives. That is, as Alistair McIntyre said in After Virtue, to know what to do next, you have to know what story you're in. And that may be the big story, or it may be the story of this day, or it may be the story of this class. To know what to do next is to know what story you're in, what narrative you're living through. So anyway, Lewis believed that a particular world picture, which extends the notion of evolution into the distant future, and which he referred to as evolutionism, or Wellesianity, after H.G. Wells, is one of the great folk myths of the modern world. So I like that notion that he calls it Wellesianity, because H.G. Wells, especially like in this utopian book that's going around, H.G. Wells is one of the first people to develop this myth. Well, that actually goes before him, but this myth that just as evolution has progressed bit by bit and from the amoeba and so on and so forth, and here we are, we're just stepping up, right? Which is not modern evolution, by the way. Modern evolution believes in punctuated equilibriums, that there are big catastrophes and then times of stability. That's equilibrium, but punctuated by disaster. And that view of evolution I find more compatible with Christianity, punctuated equilibrium. And also, it allows me to believe that God in the beginning created the genome of all life, and that as life has developed on this planet, that genome has just unpacked. Just as a dog. Let's say there was a prototypical dog once upon a time. That one dog had in its genetics all the varieties of dogs that we have today. You know, we have a dachshund, the silly little fellas, and we have the Saint Bernards, and look at all the variety of dogs, and yet all of that genetics was in the dog species originally, and we've just let it unfold. So, well, I don't want to talk about evolution, but Lewis believed in evolution in a way, but he didn't believe in evolutionism. And evolutionism extends the notion of evolution into the far distant future, that we're going to just keep progressing and progressing. In is theology poetry. That's one of Lewis's essays. Lewis summarized the grand myth of evolution, tracing man's appearance on the scene, his emergence from the cave, his mastery of nature, his dissipation of superstitions. Get rid of superstition. That's the age we're in, or have been for a couple hundred years. His self-guided evolution into the status of demigods. That's an important step in evolutionism. We no longer just let nature form us, or our DNA or whatever. We become self-guiding in our evolution, he says. That's part of this theory, that we are now at the point where we can take control of our evolution, self-guided, so that we can become demigods, gods, and that is man's, ascension to the throne of several planets before the twilight of the gods set in, when the sun cools and life runs down. So that's kind of the overarching story of evolutionism as C.S. Lewis described it. I have to say as well that, the abolition of man. This was a series of 3 lectures that Lewis gave, and in this book, the last essay, they were lectures that he gave up at Durham, but the last essay is called The Abolition, the Controllers or something like that. But in the last chapter, what he says is, there will come a super generation, and that super generation will have evolved, it will have been kind of the pinnacle of human culture development and scientific development. We get to the place where we can control our own evolution into the future, and we can control our own generation, and we can rewrite the past. Sounds like 1984. These are the controllers, he says. This group of very few people will control all of humanity, from the past to the present to the future, because they'll have control to be able to, through eugenics, specify what kind of evolution we'll have in the future. They'll be able to make man in their own image. And so this notion of the super controlling generation comes out here in this time of we reach a time of self-guided evolution in that story. He also comments on Wellesianity, and I give a couple references there where you can find him talking about it more. And then next paragraph. It is easy to see why scholars have attributed Lewis's preoccupation with Wellesianity directly to Wells, Haldane, and Haldane's going around, right? Yeah, Haldane, he's already come back. And Stapleton. And by the way, I haven't told you the story that Stapleton tells. In those 2 books, humanity reaches a stage where they astral project out of their bodies. They become disembodied intelligences. And at first, they're sort of individual intelligences that develop extra communication. What do we call that kind of communication? Extrasensory communication? Anyway, they're able to communicate with themselves as disembodied personalities. Telepathic. And then eventually, they go to all these planets, they draw in all these intelligences from other planets, and eventually this huge macro brain of intelligence, disembodied intelligence, forms and becomes God. Right? That's where we're going. If we can just astral project, develop our telepathy, and gather intelligences from all the planets, we will indeed be God. So that's the myth that Olaf Stapleton tells. And it's a very interesting myth and sort of a powerful one as well. Now, just before we leave this part of Willsianity, let me say there is someone else whom I think we are probably all familiar with to a certain degree, who holds this view, although he's passed away now, but not too long ago. His name was Carl Sagan. Do you remember Carl Sagan? Yeah. What was the series that he had? Billions and billions. We are stardust, he says. We are stardust. Is it? I don't know that one, but this song may or may not be built on Carl Sagan. What was that series that he had on PBS?
Cosmos.
Cosmos, right. Okay. Okay, so that's a little bit of background about what Willsianity is, this myth that is different than the myth of Christianity. We live in an entirely different myth, right? God created in the beginning. We believe in a divine intelligence that is not us. And however he created, we believe that we are his creatures and that the worlds we live in are his creations, right? And then we also believe the story of the fall. Again, you have to take Matt's class to just understand how much of this we understand as literal and how much of it we see as perhaps not literal, but significant in our understanding of who we are in relationship to God. We believe in the fall. We believe in the story of Israel. We believe in the incarnation of God in Christ Jesus and his substitutionary death on the cross, and that things will come to a conclusion at the end of things, and God will ultimately restore paradise. I mean, that's our mythology that we live in, right? And I like it. I like living in that mythology. It's much more friendly. It's much more cozy. It's much more reassuring than, billions of years from now, we will achieve the status of Godhead. It's just an entirely different way of looking at the universe.
Wasn't that the myth that we grew up on? That's why we feel that way about it?
So you're saying it's cozy because it reminds us of our childhood?
Maybe, but I think it's kind of our spiritual formation.
Yeah. Okay.
That we grew up with.
Yeah.
And in my case, my mother infused in me, but I think Sally does it to children in worship. There's this spiritual formation that happens in young people,
and that's probably
through that background that you just described.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why. What is it in Deuteronomy 5 or 6? It says, "Talk about these things." Moses is telling the people of Israel, "Talk about these things when you're walking along the road, when you're doing this, doing that." The formation, bringing children into the mythology is important. The first chapter in The Abolition of Man is talking about that. And that's also why C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. He wanted to initiate people into the Christian mythology.
It's kind of like giving somebody a nice cozy blanket.
Yeah.
Familiar, comforting.
Yes.
The stories become something like a blanket to us that we carry our whole life.
Yes, and I think if we're content to live within it and seek truth, it will confirm itself over and over and over again. It becomes stronger and stronger. And it's not, I don't think it's just that we are, what do they call it when you self-confirming hypothesis? I don't think it's just a self-confirming hypothesis. We find that God is doing things in our life, surprising things we had not anticipated. And so
You have the eyes to see those surprises.
yeah.
Snuggled up in our blankie too much.
Okay. All right, good. Anybody else want to talk about the mythology of being a Christian, or the story that we live in, or that in contrast with the Wellesianity?
Well, I want to know where we can get one of those blankies.
You don't have yours anymore?
In worship with.
One of our daughters had a little pink, what is it? A jacket with a hood on it, and just a little thing like that. And that was her blankie. And it just kept wearing out and wearing. Cheryl kept cutting it back. By the time we were done, we had a little square about that big of pink fabric.
Pink fleece.
But it was still her blankie.
My brother had one of those, and my mother kept cutting it back, and it was also that little piece. She'd almost wash it and hang it on the line or something. One day my dad threw it away.
Uh-oh.
Oh man, was he in trouble. Get it out of the garbage went away.
Oh dear.
I wonder if my brother ever forgave him.
I don't know. That's called going cold turkey, eh?
Yeah, I think he was.
I was just going to say, I've always liked the concept of an overarching mythology, that the storytelling of our lives, we live within, and it's the same, for me, it's the same thing as a worldview.
Yeah.
What is your worldview? And that shapes your life, it shapes the decisions you make. And, so it's always been a helpful, whether your religion is Christianity or indigenous or whatever, that's a very strong worldview.
Yeah, good point. I'm glad you mentioned indigenous, because there are the mythologies of like the Dakota and so on. It's surprising how close the Dakota mythology is to Christianity before they encountered Christians. It's amazing how tight those two are. Yeah, or at least figured out how to talk about Jesus without bringing everything else in.
Without taking over their lives.
So Leonard Peltier is back in North Dakota now. I don't know if you noticed that, but good for Leonard.
Finally.
What was the book that was about Leonard Peltier and that?
In the Spirit of Crazy Horse.
In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, I think that's right, yeah. Where the argument, well, it's actually a very long book, but tells the story of that battle, those battles that went on the reservation in the early 1970s, late.
Yeah,
Rosebud, right.
Dick Wilson's Boone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting book if you've never read it, and if you're wondering about Leonard Peltier and why he's such a hero among indigenous people, that's a good book to read.
What's the name of it?
Say it again?
In the Spirit of Crazy Horse.
What?
By
Well, if I
long
have,
author.
if I have
He
that.
wrote a book about snow leopard.
Yeah.
Just look up the title, it'll come
Right,
up.
Yeah, and I left my soul at Wounded Knee.
Oh, I read that.
I don't know if that pulls it all the way into the battles that were going on up at up at Pine Ridge or not. Anyway.
Just one of the thoughts.
Yes.
Vine Deloria's book, God is Red, tries to make sense of Christianity and Lakota religion.
Okay. And also something that Dan said reminded me of this, that having an overarching story is important to people, whether it's indigenous or Christian or whatever, even Wellesianity. But that's contrary to modern theory. What is postmodernism? There's a thinker named Lyotard, Lyotard, and I forget if he has a book named Postmodernism. It seems like it is, but he's often spoken of as sort of someone who can explain what postmodernism is, but we don't talk much about postmodernism anymore because we're now post-human. We're doing posthumanism these days. But postmodernism, one of the key factors of postmodernism was no more macro stories. We can't have macro stories. No big stories anymore. You can have little stories if you want, but you can't have big stories. Well, another way of looking at that is it's kind of like existentialism. Existentialism says we don't know what the meaning of the world is or the universe, but we know that we live right now and we have to make sense out of everything that's going on. So we're living in the existential moment. So Albert Camus, for instance,
French.
what?
French.
Yeah, Camus is French. I think, I want to say John Sartre, but I'm not sure. I think too. But anyway, that existentialism is sort of a forerunner of postmodernism. And I think you can be a Christian existentialist as long as you hold on to your macro narrative.
Well, I mean, that's the Christian existential thing, making the leap. And the leap from this unbelief, it's a leap.
So this just generates all sorts of chasing rabbits sort of thing, but making the leap. I don't know, how many of you have heard of Francis Schaeffer? Francis Schaeffer. He was a missionary. He and his wife, what was her name? Edith, yeah, Mrs. No, Edith. They went to Switzerland. They started a hostel over there up in the Alps called L'Abri. But he was actually a member of the seminary in St. Louis associated with one Presbyterian denomination. Covenant? Yeah, it's something like that. But anyway, all this preface to trying to figure out what I wanted to say now. What was it?
Sorry, I took you off track.
Yeah, no. Chasing rabbits. We were chasing rabbits. Francis Schaeffer had a book, something like, he had a couple of books that were pretty important. One of them was The God Who Is There, and another one was
How Should We Then Live?
How Should We Then Live is an newer one. He is there and he is not silent. But anyway, I'm not sure which of the books, he makes a big issue about not believing in a leap of faith. If you have a leap of faith, that's not a good thing. You should be able to rationally come to the conclusion that all this is true. And I followed Francis Schaeffer a long time, and I still think he did some good stuff. But I am kind of believing that we all have to make a little leap of faith. Whether we've proven, everything, we read Josh McDowell and the evidence that demands a verdict and all that stuff, and some other apologists, and we think, wow, there's a lot of reasons to believe, but that isn't faith. Faith isn't rational assent. Faith is responding to the presence of God in your life. When God comes, I'm preaching now. When God comes to touch you, when He invites you, when He says, "Here I am," we say either yes or no. And if we say yes, we are surrendering to Him, and we move into that relationship. That's what I believe faith is. Faith is that living in His presence. Objections? Counter.
C.S. Lewis. I was just reading The Great Divorce, and that very idea is.
Hebrews 11.
By joy, when he went to theism, he kind of was on the bus, and he says that, I don't remember the letter when he wrote, but that it was easy. You can either open the door and let him in, or you can keep the door shut. You need to open open the door and let God into our life and get into His Word and take a shot.
Well, there's a notion of kairos in the New Testament. Kairos is a Greek word. It's a different kind of time than Chronos. Chronos is over there on the wall, right here on my watch. Chronos is the god of TikTok time. And he's telling us, you got to wrap it up here in the next 5 minutes. But there is another time named Kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S. And Kairos is a Greek word, and I did a study of it once in the New Testament, and it has to do with seasons. There are seasons when things happen, and seasons when they don't happen. There are moments that are loaded with God's presence. And so I believe that coming into a personal relationship with Jesus, many of us have encountered him in a kairos, that he somehow, there's something special at some time where he approaches us and says, here I am, yes or no. And that's kind of an exploding of chronos into kairos, which is somewhat timeless. The ancients used to think that kairos was a god and that he had a forelock right up here, and if you saw him, you need to grab that forelock because he was getting away. He was on his way out. And so we came to translate kairos as opportunity. And you got to grasp the opportunity, right? But by the time we get to the Renaissance, people were saying, well, he's always getting away. He has wings on his feet. He's got that forelock, but you don't recognize him until he's already past you. So they put a figure below, and this may even go back to the ancient Greeks, but I know it came out in the Renaissance, called metanoia, which is a woman who was at his feet and was always trying to chase him down. Well, what is metanoia? To turn the mind. Repentance is what we often call it. Metanoia is often translated repentance in the New Testament. But meta means to change, noia, mind, to turn around. So here's metanoia, chasing opportunity. And in the Renaissance, kairos became Jesus. Here's the Christ. He comes to you, but we miss him. So we live a life of metanoia. We are like the woman chasing him all the time. So that the Christian life is the life of metanoia. Well, that's a little bit different way of looking at it, but I find it somewhat useful because in a sense, kind of like what Hal was saying early on, well, that wasn't very Christ-like today. We're always repenting. We are always falling short, but we're always running after Christ, always seeking him.
I think it's interesting that she was a woman.
Yeah. Bob.
Well, just a little extra thought to that is that there are some Christian denominations that believe we always have to chase after God, whereas Presbyterians, we believe God is always chasing us. God is always there.
Yeah.
And we're the ones, that have the lack of recognition of that. And we're the ones that ignore God.
Yeah.
But God is always there chasing us.
That's good. That kind of flips that image, doesn't it? It reminds me of what St. Augustine said, that we would fall away from God completely if he didn't interrupt us. He would take us out of that. And so thank God for his interruptions. Or the Hound of Heaven. You know that poem, The Hound of Heaven? It goes on for 2 or 3 columns, but it's a story about someone who was running away from God, but the Hound of Heaven kept coming after him. Okay, well, phooey. Here it is, Chronos, overarching our time. We didn't get around to talking about the stories of Out of the Silent Planet or Paralandra, but just in a minute and a half, Out of the Silent Planet, Ransom goes to Mars. He's stolen, goes off to Mars, thinks he's going to be sacrificed. But it turns out that the Martians, these different varieties of Martians, are very nice people. They've never fallen. And it turns out that we then begin to see our solar system not as something scary, but that each of the planets is controlled by an eldel, or an angel. So Mars is controlled by an Oyorsa, the ruling eldel of Mars. And it turns out, we learn in Paralandra that eldel is masculine. But in book 2, there's a traveling to Paralandra, or Venus, and here it's a story of the green lady who is the Eve of Venus.